still have quarantine here in Russia.
Yes. And how are you managing with this quarantine?
Sitting at home and working, we have a great deal of work, even more than we used to have before the quarantine. So this period is quite productive for us, though it's quite hard that we are not allowed to come for a walk somewhere far from our home.
Yes, I imagine it must be quite difficult. I've had a similar thing where since the quarantine, business has become a lot more rapid, a lot more business. I think more people are spending time inside, they've got less to do. So why not just find out one's personality type? So yeah, I think that's probably what it is. Oh, what did it say here? It said you started your YouTube before YouTube started your stream. There's a delay. Oh goodness, I didn't want that to happen. Oh well. Yeah, so I'm trying to think, what else can I ask? So can you just tell those who don't really know what you do, Timur, can you say a bit of what you do in terms of socionics?
I practice socionics and psychosophy. I have an educational center where helping people with finding a proper profession according to their psychological types. We hold some streams on socionics and psychosophy. We have courses, and we are pretty busy with consulting and professional consulting, something like that.
Okay. And what made you originally want to go into socionics?
It came quite accidentally, because I never planned to do something like that. I got acquainted with socionics in 2006. It was 14 years ago. I was interested in psychology in general, and I knew that the socionics is quite an interesting direction of psychology, but at that time I was acquiring my first profession, interpreter in English. So I planned to work on this profession, and I really worked. But it so happened then that I met some people here in Kaliningrad who were interested in socionics, and we started together to hold some meetings. And later there were people who would like to learn socionics, and I was quite experienced in that question, though I didn't take it serious. It was just a hobby for me. But I really found out that I have a really great amount of information according to that time. And I started to teach some courses in socionics. And later it became my main activity, my main profession. I quitted all other directions of my work. And so socionics became my direction number one.
What were you doing before?
I worked as an interpreter for 5 years in many firms. I worked simultaneously for various offices, and I provided interpretation in oral, in written forms. So it was something like that. As well, I was studying quite a long time because I have two educations, 2.5. My first education is interpreter. My second is journalism. I quitted it because it took too much time, and I was really hard working at that period. I couldn't just quit my job and just reading all the classic literature which was required in my studies. So later I quitted journalism and decided to come to another educational establishment to study psychology, because I was involved in socionics quite deep at that time, and I felt that psychological education would be very useful for me to really to enlarge my knowledge in psychology in general, and to find maybe some alternative psychological theories that would be interesting for me and would be useful for socionics and psychosophy. But in general, when I graduated from my profession, I was making graduation work on the topic of socionics. So it was still interesting for me, and I didn't find anything more modern in a psychological course than socionics and psychosophy. So I still consider it the most advanced theories that describe the differences between people.
I see. Thank you. And what was it initially about journalism that attracted you?
I like this profession. It was my first profession that I had to acquire after I moved from Belarus to Russia. And so I wanted to enter some university to have living, to have new profession, and to establish my life somehow here. So I needed a new profession, and I found out that journalism would be nice because it is a profession that I was always interested in historical topics, political topics. So I thought that maybe it can be a profession just for a rainy day, so to say. Maybe it could be my future job, I thought at that time. So I entered this profession. It was really interesting to study here. There were many interesting teachers there, so it was quite fun to study there. But I found that this profession is not my lifetime occupation. So I decided to change it.
I see. And what made you want to go into interpretation?
Excuse me once more.
Interpreting, sorry. What made you want to be an interpreter?
It was quite simple because since my childhood, I had some skills in studying foreign languages. It was quite easy to me. So I studied Italian, I studied Polish, I studied English. It was quite easy for me. So I decided that my first profession shall be connected with foreign languages somehow. And it was quite obvious. And I knew that foreign language will always be useful for me, anywhere, even now.
Makes sense. And what is it about learning foreign languages that comes to you so easily? How do you go about doing it? How does it work for you?
I don't know. I'm just listening to people who are from foreign, who are the main. I'm just listening to people from foreign countries who have good language skills, and I'm listening to them, and I try to understand them very quickly, and I try to learn the language very quickly. I noticed since my early school that foreign languages are very quickly coming to my mind in comparison with my schoolmates, for example. And it was quite obvious for me that I really get well with all these foreign languages. I went to some courses on Polish language. I just went to Poland for several weeks, and I really spoke quite well Polish language after some weeks, because Polish language it's a Slavonic language. It is similar to my native language, Belarusian. So I really got very quickly the main principles of this language, and I just listened to local people from Poland. And I still come to Poland. I can speak Polish, and Polish people say me that I speak quite well. So I got a feedback from everywhere. Also, I went to courses of Italian language, and I also was the best in that group. So it was quite obvious for me. But I really don't remember anything about Italian now. It was 19 years ago.
I see. And are there any parts of learning a new language that you find more difficult than other people?
The most difficult part, I think, it's grammar. It very quickly I forget about grammar, because I studied German when I was acquiring my first profession, and now I don't remember almost anything about German grammar, because my brain is working. I noticed everything that can be used in daily life, I remember well, but anything that cannot be used, anything that is not useful, my brain just deletes and I remember nothing about it. So very such mechanism is working very fast. I would better learn some language when speaking to a foreign person rather than reading a certain textbook or making some exercises.
Ah, so put it into practice, more important.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And okay. And you said that you wanted to try out journalism, sort of a rainy day thing, and so it was because of some of your historical knowledge. What got you into history?
About history?
What got you into history? What made you interested in history?
I got interested in 20th century history. I think it is the most interesting century and the most documentary provided to study. So it just happened since my early childhood. I was interested in the history of USSR, of Germany, World War II, and everything that is connected with that. The history of all former Soviet republics, all the political collisions that happened in these countries, and everything that happened in 90s. So politics and geopolitics and history, they're always coming somewhere very close to each other. And I really liked in my childhood to watch some TV programs that were telling about that, and about some maybe something about Stalin period. I got very interested in that. I watched everything that was on TV on that time about history of 20s, 30s, about Russian Revolution, about Third Reich and Adolf Hitler. I watched everything that was on TV on that time. So I thought that maybe I would go to journalism and I will make some maybe programs about that, about politics or about history, something like that.
I see. And what was it about that period in the 20th century, that was so compelling for you?
I grew up in Belarus, and this country is still very Soviet-like. So I was interested, how did it happen that we are living in such a very Soviet environment while other countries are changing? Even Russia has changed dramatically. And I think that among all the 15 former Soviet republics, maybe Belarus is still the most Soviet from all of them. It really reminds something from Brezhnev period. We have still a very Soviet, in Belarus there is a very Soviet president, and all the social life is very similar to that was in the USSR. So I was very interested, why does it happen? Why do we have such a poor economy? Why do we have such a poor social system? And why we have so little prospects for young people in this country? So I decided to leave Belarus more than 10 years ago, and I still live in Russia, and I find Russia is much more free country than Belarus.
Yes. And could you just tell us a bit more, what makes something more Soviet? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Because I think many people watching have never really been in a country or an environment which is more Soviet.
The Soviet environment, it is, it's something about consciousness, something about world outlook. So a Soviet environment and Soviet society is when all the people are relying heavily on the government, on the state. They're just going to school, then they are going to university or institute, and then they're just going to some only one stable work for all their life, and then they get their retirement pension and something like that. And they rely on the government in full scale. They do not think of something of being independent, of creating some business, or they are very similar to each other and very afraid when someone is different from the crowd. It's very hard atmosphere sometimes. So you have to be very the word, I forgot the word. Imperceptible person you have to be. So everyone will perceive you as not dangerous. But if you differ from others, you're becoming very dangerous, and the collective consciousness will try to put you somewhere down just to make you like everyone else. So this Soviet environment is a very collective environment, and they don't like when someone is very different. I was always very different, and I really suffered from that environment. So,
and what about you? What about made you different?
I was always questioning the things that were around me. It happened at school. It happened when I got my first profession. I had some problems with local police in Belarus because of my political views. There is a still special article in Belarus. For example, if you offend a president, you can get 5 years imprisonment. So it is quite dangerous to criticize the current president, which is okay in Russia, and in Belarus it can be very sad consequences you can have. So even my mother lost her job because of me, because of my political activity. So, yes, it's quite okay for Belarus. And if someone is different, if someone is having his own opinion, he gets attacked by the local community, or from the side of government, or from the side of police, something like that. And I really felt that it's not a healthy situation when something like that happens.
No, sounds completely unrecognizable for people in the West to have, from their parents lose their job because of their personal views. That is a very different environment, very, very different. And goodness, and what would you say is one of the most challenging experiences for you during that time or after that time?
I had some problems with the law in Belarus when I was 17. And at that time, it was the first when I thought about emigrating to Russia, because I was born in Russia, but I grew up in Belarus. But I decided to get my first education, and later to decide whether I'm going to stay in Belarus or I'm going to leave. Nothing has changed. I got my first education and I decided to leave. And the most challenging thing was when I had such that problems with the law, I had many people who just became afraid of me and became afraid of socializing with me in order not to have some problems. And at that time, I really knew what people are really my friends and what are really not. It was quite clear. Yeah. There were only a few people who supported me on that time. It was really very important for me. But the majority, they were just afraid. And I knew later, some people, I got the information, I knew later that even there were special gatherings at all schools in the region, and they were telling about me, and they were telling that if you would like to be like that person, you will get very strict problems in your life. So, so Belarusian system of education really frightened pupils of schools using me.
Oh goodness! And so let's get some clarity on. So you got in trouble with the law when you were 17, and you said you were someone trying to understand why things are working that way. What line of questioning would you have taken that have caused you actually get into trouble with the law? How outspoken would you have to have been?
I really criticized the president of Belarus. I was not agree, and I still don't agree with everything that happens out there. So I was young and silly. Maybe now I wouldn't do that, but still at that time it was quite okay for me. At 17, I think it's okay for many people to do something like that. I got some political activity. I got some connections with youth organization, which struggled against the current regime. So I got connection with them, and I spreaded some newspapers who were oppositional towards the official point of view. And
Yes.
Later, I really irritated the local police very much, because it was happening in a very small town, and everything was known to everybody. When something happened, everybody knew about that, and everybody knew that who did that. So it was something like that. It was this activity, and I was really disagree with the ideological compulsory teaching at school. I knew that many teachers were just obliged to do that, not in order not to lose their job. But some of them were really they're very sincere in providing this ideology, and I thought it was very stupid, because Soviet Union is over, and why are you telling like that? And why should we think only in one way, only according to official point of view? I was really irritated by that.
Makes sense. And essentially, also 17 is a very young age to be getting involved politically. How old were you when you already knew what your views were, what your opinions were about the country you lived in? When did you form those views?
First, as far as I remember, my first thoughts on this issue were maybe when I was 13 or 14, something like that. I was reading a newspaper which had some alternative point of view towards what's happened in Belarus. So I read this newspaper, and I looked at the official mass media, and I saw that their positions are quite opposite, and I really got tired of that propaganda from official TV channels, from official newspapers, from official teachers at my school who were providing just like this. And I felt that there's something incorrect about that. It was like Brezhnev time, like 40 years ago in USSR. You can see all that, the majority of the things in modern Belarus.
I see. Very interesting. And from that disagreement, from that sense, this is propaganda, I don't relate to any of the stuff I'm being told, what then led you to want to think, I should join a youth organization and proliferate material for that youth organization?
Why did I do that, or what?
What made you want to go from disagreement to action?
I felt that it was quite obvious for me to make some activity like this, because I felt that I always influenced that people that I socialized to, and I thought that if I if I make a bit more people who are thinking like me, I think that maybe positive changes will take place sooner. But I was too young and too naive maybe at that time, because all the organizations that were opposite towards the official authorities, they were left liberals, if speaking to our modern terms. But I didn't understand that at that time. I knew later my views quite changed, but not dramatically. I still against what is happening in Belarus, but not from the lefty side, but from another side. I believe that there is an alternative to all that. There is an alternative to Soviet administration, and there is an alternative to left liberal values of so-called European values.
I see. And what provoked that further change in your viewpoints?
I got a bit older and wiser, and started to learn some political literature, historical literature, and I started searching my own position among all of that, and I really got now the word, I forgot the word. I got a disappointment when there were elections in 2006. It was the first election campaign that I gave my vote, because I was 18 at that time. It was my first elections. And I really believed that these elections can really change something. There were alternative candidates, but they were all sponsored by some European structures who were left liberals. And I really got disappointed in them because everything just got wasted and everything remained as it was before, and it still remains. And I found that it is not a good power. It is not a good alternative. And if I, for example, if we take a situation when some of these candidates can win in these elections, I think it could be even worse for Belarus than it used before. Because now we have the situation that is just like frozen situation from the Soviet times, and nothing changes. But if happens such that a left liberal candidate comes, he will just give up all the power and all the sovereignty, I think, to Western countries. I believe that Belarus shall be Russia-oriented, but not strictly against Russia. For example, if left liberal revolution comes in Belarus, there will happen something like in Ukraine. We see 5 or 6 years already. I wouldn't like to see something like in Ukraine, in Belarus. I believe that Belarus is a different country, and it can be really saved, but it has to be reformed in a very reasonable way.
I see. And what does reasonable reform look like to you?
We have in Belarus there is a very great problem with entrepreneurs, with business. There are many strict regulations that do not allow some initiative people in working. Small business in Belarus is almost dead. You can do something very, very little, but if you have some significant profit, there comes somebody from government and tells you, you have to build a stadium on your own money. Either you are building that or you will get in prison. I know many histories like that. And it is very, very retarded system, social system that comes from the very highest position in the government. So it is about all the Soviet atmosphere. It is all connected. The atmosphere is not healthy. The most initiative, the most clever people are going to other countries, and they do not have any opportunities to develop their potential in Belarus. So I think it is the main problem, to create a good climate for these active people.
I see. Thank you. Let's change subject a bit to something off politics, off career. What do you like to do just to relax?
I like listening to music, most of all. I consider myself a very, just a moment, music lover. Okay, I consider myself a music lover. I have a great collection of music. I have about 200 or 300 favorite bands, only favorite, those that I listen very frequently. So it is the main way of relaxation. And I try to listen to music in all cases that I can do that. While I'm working and while I'm relaxing, it is okay. So it's number one. And what else? I like to go for a walk because I love my city, Kaliningrad. It is very green city. It is very pleasant to go for a walk. Or I go to the sea. It's not far from here, only 30 minutes by bus. And I just looking at the sea, and every tension, every negative energy, everything just going away. And a sea makes a very healthy effect on me, both physically and psychologically.
Thank you. And what was it about music that makes you love it so much? Are there any particular kinds of music that you like over others?
There are many kinds of music. It just, I think I was born with that, because I remember me listening to music since I was 3 years old. And when it was 90s. So I collected music on cassettes. Later, I became collecting music on CDs. Now it is MP3. So I like music of some heavy genres: metal, progressive rock, classical music, symphonic metal, maybe some alternative rock, something like that. But mostly I like complicated music or heavy music. All that heavy genres, from classics like Iron Maiden, for example, or Judas Priest, heavy metal classics, or Black Sabbath, to more complicated bands like Tool, for example, progressive metal from the United States, or Dream Theater, or King Crimson. It's a classic from there. A great deal of my favorite bands are from Britain, by the way. King Crimson, Black Sabbath, Anathema.
What do you like about those tracks? What those bands? What do they do that makes you want to listen to them more rather than, say, I don't know, Handel or Mahler?
The music gives me energy. The music gives me some necessary mood if I don't have any, or it shall be coinciding with the mood that I have, and there comes something like synergy between my mood and the music. So it's just a source of energy, I think, and also it helps me thinking, because when I was occupied with my job of interpreting, I used to work much with documents, which had many pages of technical information, or some legislation information, and it was much easier for me to work with this information when I'm listening to music. My brain just works better with music.
Yes, makes sense. Thank you. And what sorts of things do you tend to find most difficult in the different jobs that you've had?
The most difficult thing, when I used to work as an interpreter, or when I worked as a Socionics teacher, the first years of my work, it was very difficult for me to socialize with a great quantity of unknown people. So I used to meet new people every week, and sometimes every day, and it was quite difficult for me. It was quite exhausting to get acquainted with them, to speak with them, and it was really hard for the first couple of years to socialize so much. Later it becomes some easier, and now we're working only online, but still I think it's not very easy for me to socialize with a great number of people at a time.
Yes. And what is it about that you find difficult to do?
It's difficult to me to make some tuning to every new person, because people are very different. They're very different in their thoughts. They're very different in their behavior. So when I, for example, make some consulting for a new person, I have to tune to some person for 10 or 15 minutes just to understand what a person is like in front of me, and how to socialize, how it's better to socialize with him or with her. And this tuning, I think, gets the most of energy when I'm doing that. But now it's much more easier if I'm comparing with my first years of working. It was quite unusual for me to socialize with such a great number of people. It just happened very dramatically. I was not very sociable through all my life, but suddenly I was occupied in the activity which required too much socialization.
I see. You said before that when you had these ideas which were discordant from Belarus, where you're living, you thought that if you talked to enough people and got them invested enough, you could change minds. But also you say that you find it quite difficult to actually get to know new people and persuade them that way. Why in Belarus was it easier? Did it feel like it could be easier for you to change people's minds in a political way?
At that time, I was living in a very small town, and I had a constant circle of acquaintances, and it was easier to socialize with them. I just didn't have an experience of socializing with new persons every day. And later, I understood how difficult it can be.
I see. Makes sense. Thank you. Okay. And now, do you have many friends?
It depends on what person do you consider as a real friend, because I had a great number of people who I consider friends, but I no longer socialize with them just because they have their own lives. We are living in different countries and cities, and we just do not have time because many of them have their own families, have their own circles of socializing, and we just, our roads just do not cross anymore. So now I don't have a wide circle of communication. There are people that I would like to see more often, but they live in other cities, and we socialize a couple of times a year, for example, when they manage to come to Kaliningrad and we socialize. All other persons, I used to socialize with many people when I was studying journalism. We were all young and without our permanent jobs and place of livings. So later it changed dramatically because all of them just went to another cities. They have their own life, and we just do not have anything in common right now. So I'm not very sociable at the permanent period of time. And I feel quite okay because I have too much socialization connected with my job.
I see. Thank you. And what qualities should a person have for them to be considered a friend of yours?
I think the most important thing is intelligence. I like clever people, and it is the main feature that attracts me in someone. Even he's not very agree with me in some points, it's more important that he's intelligent and we have some talk or debates or on something. The next thing, I think that he shouldn't be he shouldn't have some very different political views from mine, because it would be difficult for me to have a close friendship, for example, with a communist, because our socialization will get into arguments and fightings. So the next thing is reliability. I like people who are giving some promises and taking their word and making just like they promised to me. It is very important thing. Responsibility, reliability, and the person has to be honest to me, I think, because I'm always honest with the person that I socialize closely. And for example, if he or she doesn't like something in me or about me, he should tell me about that, and I will get this information and decide what to do with that. But if somebody is behaving like hypocritical, he's smiling to me, and later I know that he's speaking something very, very unpleasant about me to other people, I think that it has no meaning and has no reason to socialize with such person. Something like that. Intelligence, reliability, and honesty.
Thank you. And would you say you are a reliable person?
I think yes, because if I give some promises, I do my best to hold that promise and to do what I promised. Because when I was working as an interpreter at one office, I worked there for 5 years. When I came there, there were some other interpreters who were also occupied in English. And later I became the only one who fulfilled all the volume of work because I was the most reliable of all of them. And I didn't break the deadline, not a single time during the 5 years. So I think I'm quite reliable person.
Thank you. And it's interesting you say that, because I know you're talking about interpreting very technical documents, very voluminous numbers of pages. How that sounds like something which could be very draining to some people. Is it something which you found draining?
Excuse me, I didn't get the question.
It sounds like what you're doing, looking for very voluminous numbers of pages, very technical wording in those pages.
Yes.
Is that something which would have been very draining to you, or were you more able to manage that?
No, it was really interesting for me. Sometimes the documents were really difficult because I had to get into unknown topics for me. The production of concrete, for example, I once had a very huge documentation about that. So I had to get into this topic, to read some additional materials, to read some articles, to understand it. It even was more interesting when in comparison with just ordinary documentation about, for example, establishment documents of some company that is registered somewhere in British Virgin Islands. They were similar and were not very interesting to translate. It's just a routine. But sometimes the tasks were really interesting. And the most interesting thing for me when I was studying for interpreter, I got my graduation work, which was about the translation of artistic texts, the texts from the songs. It was much more interesting. But my work as interpreter was connected only with official documents. So it was quite interesting, I think. It was quite resource requiring, but it was really interesting.
How easy is it for you to change your mind?
It depends on what issue. There are some issues that I very hard to change my mind. And there is a great number of questions that I don't have any particular opinion about. So I'm ready and I'm open to hear different points of view and to choose some of them or not to choose none of them. And I feel okay about that. There are some issues that, for example, I really believe that socionics is a very good potential and very modern and very advanced psychological theory, because I saw thousands of proofs about that. And it's quite difficult for me to agree when somebody is coming to me and he says, oh, socionics, it's not a science. It's not working. I just don't agree with that because I saw numerous proofs that it works.
I see. And what is the example then of something which you wouldn't change your mind on very easily? And what would be something which you could change your mind on very easily?
I think my political views. I cannot be pursued by a communist, for example. It is a really very interesting issue for me to study communism and Marxism arguments. I know all of them, and I can predict the absolute majority of arguments that this or that communist can tell me. And I just don't take them seriously. It all looks for me like religious views. It's not about science. It's not about objective world. So at this point, I'm not very easy to over-persuade. And there is a huge number of questions that I just can't even tell you what can be a question. For example, I just don't have enough knowledge about some issue, so I don't have opinion about that. For example, I don't know whether a Boris Johnson is a good prime minister or not, because I don't have enough information about that.
I think it does remain to be seen for many people. Okay. Let's see what else I can ask you. So in the progression of your career in moving towards socionics, you dropped a number of things, journalism, interpretation, for instance. Do you see yourself ever going back to any of these other areas in the future?
I wouldn't like to go back because I think in socionics I can implement in the most good way my all traits of my personality. Because when I was occupied in interpretation, I used only my analytical abilities and my knowledge in foreign languages. But also I can perform in front of an audience. Also I can create some texts. Also I can do some administrative work. And now when I'm working in Socionics, I feel that I implement the absolute majority of my skills that I have from nature. So I wouldn't like to go back. And this profession is just a knowledge that can be implemented if something goes terribly wrong. For example, if the world economy crashes down, I think that people who know foreign languages will always be useful.
Thank you. I got one last question. How do you handle situations of confrontation and conflict with others?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the relations which I have with this person. So could you make the question more concrete?
Okay, so let's say there is someone, let's say you're at a, I don't know, a bar or a club and someone's being quite rowdy, getting up in your face. How do you handle someone like that?
I control my behavior very well, and if I see some danger that can come from some person, I would like to avoid this danger and not to have any problems with the law, because I used to have them and I really remembered them very well. So my first thought is to avoid the conflict and not to be involved in that. So I would like to stay away from this situation. I think it's not very reasonable to get into fight with some drunk person or in some situation which can end not very positive way for me, for example. So I think if we are talking about a straight conflict which can lead to some fighting, I think it's better to avoid that.
Yeah, makes sense. How about in a situation where you've got a negotiation, say in a business situation where there aren't any rules or laws or authorities overseeing you? How about in that sort of situation where when you have cross purposes with someone, but you are allowed to, within certain limits, to gain a clear advantage?
I try to solve every such conflict or every such problem in a very reasonable way. And I try to be neutral, but showing my interest in that and not letting some other people make some direct or other. Just a moment. So I'm not going to make somebody to. I forgot the word.
Okay.
Yes, it's so simple. Damage. I wouldn't like to make damage for me from anybody's side, so I try to negotiate with that person and to find some reasonable decision. Because it was, there was an example. I left my journalism profession because of one teacher, which I had a conflict with. So I decided to leave the profession because the graduation was depending on this teacher very, very high. And I had to study 2 years on many subjects with that teacher. And I knew that nothing good will come from that. So I just evaluated my time, my energy, and I decided it was not reasonable to stay there. And it was not reasonable. I tried to settle the conflict directly with that teacher and with the administration of the university, but it didn't. There's nothing that happened. I didn't manage to solve the conflict in these terms. I tried to pass the exams. I was a very good student. I studied 3 years, and all my marks were very high. I got I don't remember what is the system of marking in Great Britain, but I had 5 of 5 at all subjects, and it was the only teacher that put me 3. And I tried to pass her exams 4 times, and later I decided it has no any sense to proceed in that direction. So I decided to leave.
Right. Wow. Okay, thank you. I would like to maybe have the audience ask a few questions.
Okay.
While we have you here. Let me take a few of these. Here's one from Sven. Yeah, I want to know if you tidy your room.
If I'm tidy in my room?
Do you tidy up your room?
I'm not very good in that question, because I prefer spending my time on most important tasks that I have. For example, if I have a great volume of work, I can work many days, and I just have to have a rest from that. And tidying my room can take some energy, extra energy from me. So I'm putting this question aside, and I'm making my room tidy and my place tidy when I have enough energy for that. Many people believe that it is the question number one. If your room is not tidy, you cannot work in this room and something like that. I don't believe in that. I think that you have to fulfill your most important tasks first and make your room tidy when you have extra energy for that.
Thank you. Let's see what else there is here. I think that's actually the only question. Okay, good. In which case, I think I can give you my analysis, Timur.
Okay.
I think that nothing IEE makes quite a bit of sense.
I waited for that.
No, I think that LSI makes a lot of sense from this interview, and I know that the reasons I'm going to have are probably going to be different from your own reasons, but I do find it interesting, remarkable that they do align. I think it may be because you maybe see yourself as very aligned between your psycho yoga and your socionics types. As for me, I'm just looking at what I think to be the socionics. So what I see is, first of all, from a young age, a tendency to question, to really get to forming your views on what things are, how things are going in the world around you, in your country around you, in the situation. And there's a clarity seeking in that. And it's not about, for instance, what just makes sense for me. So what makes sense for the broader society? How can I actually make a change in my environment around me for the better? And you approach that through really asking questions, really trying to get the sense, does this make sense? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And interrogating that. Now, and you started with that position of disagreement, and only once you had that position of disagreement did you then try to act upon it by going to involve yourself in some sort of wider political movement, the youth group, try to proliferate your opinions, try to convince other people. And so we see here already someone who's quite confident in forming their opinions on what they think. When you're answering a lot of my questions, there was a question, either you know it quite clearly and give it quite a concise way, even when you're talking to me about your relationships with people, about your friend, you might make someone a friend, you can summarize at the end, this is my checklist. They're reliable, they're intelligent, and they're not so different in their political views to me. And so we see that there's a conciseness, there is a clarity there in what you give. There's an incisiveness in your questioning to really get to the heart of what things are, how things make sense to you. There is also an ability, as you could see with your language learning. You said that getting to the basic principles of how that language turns is an important way in terms of how you then learn the language. So breaking it down into its parts, making sense of it in that way. And then, of course, putting it into use. And it's interesting that almost like relic languages, left behind languages, you're not actually using, you're not actually acting out in some way, they tend to fall a bit by the wayside. Though once you start doing them again, you can then pick up the principles again and be able to use them perfectly well in that respect. And I think that people often underestimate the amount which introverted logic has in language learning, in understanding underlying grammar, syntax, vocabulary, etc. And so, yeah, I think introverted logic makes most sense as a leading function. And I think making sense of it also being blocked with extroverted sensation. You're someone who is good at assessing now where the threats are, how to act, or is an appropriate way to actually get the advantage you need to, or to leave if it's just not worth your time, not worth your energy. And you're aware also about how society should be run in a way where there's a certain toughness. You don't like the sort of lefty liberalism because you think they're just going to give away Belarus to Europe. And a sense of, no, we've got things we need to defend here, things important to hang on to. It's just that how things are being done at the moment are just stupid and left over from communism. And so there is certainly a protection aspect there, which I think is very interesting. I think that also, again, assessing threats, you know from your experience what actually works, what actually then gets you into trouble. To begin with, when you were younger, you were a lot more impulsive. People tend to be more impulsive when they're younger. But it's interesting that your immediate instinct was also, I know I'm right in this. I know these people are wrong. I want to do something and get more people on board with what I want to do and make some sort of change. And there's more of a naivety in terms of how much change you could actually create. But it's interesting that going to action was the immediate thing you thought to do. And over time, you've learned to be more cautious. You learn to actually stop and think, is this going to lead to the outcomes which I actually need? So in that respect, I see quite a bit of extrovert sensation and a good judgment call making in terms of how things will lead to you getting what you want, or will lead to you being subdued or subordinated by someone else. It's interesting also, there's a good blending between the extroverted sensation and the introverted sensation. There's a lot of energy conservation. You don't plow forward at high intensity to the point where you've basically tired yourself out and you don't actually get the work done which you need to do. So instead, you're aware of how much energy you need to conserve and maintain to push forward on what you want to do. You can work at those high intensities, then taking those breaks, and also thinking what is important to focus on, what is not too important to focus on. You prioritize your introverted logic and you focus and work through in that respect, while always being aware of how to make things more chilled and more relaxing for you, while you're also doing it to keep it sustainable. You like to go out, take in nature, enjoy the movements of water on the ocean, for instance. There's on the sea also the desire for music. You like things which are more intense and more energy focused, but it's interesting that you do also have a nuanced and complex way of describing how you actually get that relaxation for yourself, which I think is very interesting. And just in general, how you go about acting, again, it's you're not a blowhard in your forcefulness. It's more restrained, it's more controlled, and it's more balanced. I think that is what we see when you have extrovert sensation and introvert sensation working in that fluid compatibility between the two of them. Creative extrovert sensation, demonstrative introverted sensation. And in general, when you're working through your projects, you are very sustainable, very reliable in getting things done when others were not. The other interpreters did not complete things to their deadlines, doing a very sort of specific, very sort of technical language. I know for myself, I find going through a folder, I ran out of energy very quickly. I couldn't do it, but you could get through very quickly in that. And we're very reliable and sustainably on that. I think also points to more introverted sensation in a stronger position. It's interesting looking at how you see your career progressing over time. And you talk about, you tried these things which you thought could be a good idea, and these things, say, in interpreting, makes sense because you're good at languages, and also journalism because of your interest in history, your interest in geopolitics of the 20th century particularly. And what we see also is a pruning of your interest, not an expansion of your interest, but a pruning of it towards socionics being the thing which you are ultimately completely focused on. That pruning, I think, makes a lot of sense for introvert intuition over extrovert intuition. It's why I asked you, were you interested in going back to any of these other things, maybe to explore them more and open up those possibilities again, when constraints of time, constraints of resources were no longer an issue? I'm back. Sorry about that. I say, so where you're using your capabilities to the best of your ability, it just seems to be the right direction and signal for what you're focusing on and doing, and you're not interested in going back. When I asked you also, in a situation where you don't change, it's easy for you to change your mind. You know, oh, it's when you don't really have an opinion already. When you've taken in enough information for you to have an opinion on what you think, you weren't given examples of you then changing your mind or even looking to change your mind, just setting a high bar. I find even with extrovert intuition, people with more extrovert intuition, they're more willing to change their mind, even if they know quite a bit, as long as it meets their parameters. But for you, it's quite clear once you know, once you know your position on it, you weren't entertaining the idea of you changing your mind, at least in your answers. So overall, I can think that extrovert intuition is in a more vulnerable position there. And I think introvert intuition, one, learn to become more cautious, seeing long-term outcomes of what you're doing, understanding the history, the background of things and where they lead through to now, and also pruning your interests towards those which are of greatest meaning and significance to you in your life, points to more mobilizing introvert intuition. Starting from more impulsive action taking towards becoming more strategic, more long-sighted in how you think, which is a good, more natural development, I'd say, for LSIs and ESIs. I should also say that in terms of your ethics, introverted ethics, I think, is stronger than your extroverted ethics. When you like to socialize with people, when you need to socialize with people, you do the tuning. You have to get to know each person more as an individual, adjust yourselves more to them as a person, but you also find that draining. It's not really what you want to do. You're more interested in your ideas, in your positions and your beliefs. It's why if someone's too different to you in terms of your political framework, then that's not going to be someone you're going to really prioritize your relationship with. You don't mind challenge and debate within a certain parameter. And so the need to get to know people in the one-to-one, why do that? Because it's still more accessible to you than straightforward extroverted ethics of presenting to everyone and getting the mood right for everyone. Instead, you can do it to some degree, but you think, actually, I can't really get everyone on board. I need to actually meet people on the one-to-one level for me to actually get my message across, for me to actually socialize with those people and get to know them and understand them. So what we see is something less desirable being done to get to something which is more desirable, but you can't really get at yourself, which is the extroverted ethics. Introverted ethics therefore makes sense as the role function. And the idea then, I would imagine, is someone who can just provide the extroverted ethics and create that environment for you. You wouldn't then need to do the introverted ethics. It seems almost laborious to get to know people on a one-to-one individual and tune your message to them as an individual and form that relationship. I think what else I can go through. So cover the intuition, the ethics, the logic. I think I don't see much in terms of extroverted logic, in terms of feeding you and your views, in terms of forming what your positions are and having that clarity of your position. Ideology, I think, is something which makes a lot of sense to you from a very young age in terms of your ideology clashing with those of Belarus, the more Soviet ideology. And it's interesting that if you look at 20th century history, what was very particular about that time was that there were clashes of different ideologies. The Soviets, the Nazis, even those in the West, and the more we could call classical liberal influenced powers. And very much about clashes of ideologies, trying to implement those ideologies through force in many different ways, through military resources and also police control in the actual societies. And being attracted to that is very interesting and suggests more introverted logic with extroverted sensation. And the collection of factual data, collection of information, quite technical, grounded stuff, like say concrete, you can find that quite interesting and learn about that. But at the end of the day, you're only really taking that stuff in to better, and what you actually decided to keep are those which match up to your interests, the things which you think are most important, and particularly your structured more, this is correct, that is incorrect way of thinking. So it would make sense to me that extroverted logic is strong, but not in a particularly more pronounced position. Certainly not engaged with in the same way that you're engaging with introverted sensation and that sort of more balancing effect. I only see it being used just to support introverted logic when it needs it. And I think that those are all the, that will be all the information elements, Model A. Do you have any questions for me, Timur?
I so hope for being ESE.
Yes.
Because nobody typed me as ESE. yet.
So, oh, was that who typed you? No, you were hoping I would type you, ESC.
Yes, yes. I have 12. I have 12 versions, and I hoped that I will get some more of them.
No, I think it's always been very clear for me, and I just wanted to explore deeper, see if I could challenge my preconception of you. I knew that was a main challenge for me. See if you could be something different. But any day, what I see is someone who could be LSI, could be SLI, but clearly the values are very much beta in socionics. It's very much external change rather than that internal personal development and growth. So it's very much beta values in that respect. Yeah.
You know, that's very interesting, because I was interested in the method that you use. It was interesting if you use some prepared questions for everyone, but I found out that you hold a conversation very different with different people, and you are asking just coming from the background of concrete person. So it's very interesting that you do that. I think it's very good. It was really interesting to ask your questions, and I'm really grateful to you.
Thank you. I'm grateful to do my one as well.
Yes. Do you feel some resonance with beta values, or still not? I'm still hoping that you will become a one day.
I've always played with the idea of me being a bit more of a beta-ish SLE. Sorry, a beta-ish ILE. But I would say that, for instance, how I always approached ideological differences of other people, it's not one of, say, competition so much. It's where I've experienced enough to form a certain view, but part of me is always hoping that they can come up with something completely new to change my mind. And for me, having someone change my mind is quite a thrilling experience if it can actually happen. And it becomes rarer and rarer over time, because the more you do, the more you put to the test, the less possibility there is left, which could be changing your mind. But I was in someone where I cannot possibly bring myself to sort of just shut down, descend, and move on to something else. I can't do it. I need to explore, hear new views, hear new perspectives, or I'm just not, otherwise I feel guilty and bad for myself, and I'm depriving myself of something really important there. And I think the way I understand SLE, I think in some ways is more closed in the way you understand SLE, because I've opened it up to behavior. I've opened it up to other areas. When I say opened it up, it's just how I've learned socionics, as being open up to behavior. And so when I see SLEs, I'm looking for something which is more specific than perhaps what you're looking for in terms of the questionnaire and how people are answering that. So I've never been looking at, for instance, they're talking about some concrete details. For instance, I'd say that needs to be an overwhelming focus for what they're doing, about the acquisition of some sort of resources or power. It needs to be also at the expense, I would say, of long-term orientedness. The sort of person who acts in a more superficial way and doesn't have that depth of looking into things and where things are coming from. And I can see so many examples of people I've typed SLE who would be that. The thing is, looking at my gallery, SLE is probably one of the most common types for us to type celebrities and famous figures. We've got so many examples of those. I think if I were to take an approach like you, I imagine that gallery would grow to a huge proportion of people who actually end up looking at. And I'm just wondering how much, if you end up tweaking that and managing that, how many people will be left who aren't the SLE? But maybe the other things then can cut that off in terms of the logics being used, in terms of use of introverted logic, extrovert logic. I know that your approach to introverted logic allows more abstraction than my approach to introverted logic. And I think it is certainly something which we need to compare and contrast our celebrities more, I think, and our famous figures. But I just know when we go to the profiles and describing me in terms of my profile, people who know me did not resonate with what was being said in that respect. So for me to make sense in SLE based on your method, it would suggest that maybe the description of profiles, what it means to be an SLE, may have to change. Or I'm living some sort of lie. I'm not being who I am in many respects, because I may be secretly going for power, secretly building up my resources, but actually trying to appear like some sort of innocent, sort of childlike, very sort of friendly figure online. And those are sort of questions it opens up. And I don't know, I was found at the moment the signals are making sense for how I've separated ILE and SLE. I know a lot of the people you've typed ILE as well are different to how the people I've typed ILE. People who are very sort of conceptually inclined, I wouldn't necessarily then say they're actually extrovert intuition inclined. I could say that could still be introvert intuition. For instance, Carl Jung as a very clear example of that. And I would have always have said that was very much more of an introverted intuition focus. This movement towards the collective unconscious, the idea of a deeper symbologies and resonances underlying the views he's putting across, rather than much of sort of breadth exploration and taking in lots of different ideas which are statically separated from one another. And certainly in his work, he wasn't known for a great variety of jumping around different ideas. He had this main emphasis and focus on the archetypes, and some of it then tangented off slightly towards psychological types as one book. But there's a very clear overall focus in what he was doing throughout his life. And I'm thinking for myself, I want socionics to be brought to its position of prevalence, because I think so many opportunities can actually be realized in that. But once I've done that, I want to do a lot of other things as well. I want to go back into musical theatre. I want to do a run in politics as well, which I know for a beta would make sense, but not necessarily for an alpha in your system. Although I've got a broader range of boundary what I consider an alpha to be. Because I think if you're in politics where you are making positive differences for people, and people are happy and having better lives in sort of a more local area, and also you're someone who is just being up in front of people and having that sort of performance aspect, I've always been attracted to as well. And I wouldn't necessarily say that would require beta from my metrics for understanding. So there are lots of different reasons why I would still think ILE makes sense, at least in my system. But the question is, if I were to adopt your system for understanding it, would I be able to take everything that you've said and also make sense of it as being an SLE? And would that making sense of it also be satisfying? Will I think that actually is the ruling arbitrary, or is it making sense in a way which everything fits together? And that's something which I want to explore and get to know more. If I can put myself into your perspective, into where you're coming from, and see if I can form as robust an argument for why I am an SLE rather than ILE from your perspective. Because then I could start seeing it as being two alternative viewpoints at equal pairing. And that's sort of what I want to get to give it the chance to see if we can get to that. And I don't think I can really just say, no, you're wrong, I'm just going to move on from what you're saying. I think I don't feel comfortable doing that. But also because I know I'm doing that, that's also within my own system and my own structure. That makes me think that's also more ILE rather than SLE. Would an SLE do that? Probably not. In my understanding, SLE, maybe in your understanding, SLE. So that's, I think it is considering these different ways I could approach this issue. I find it also interesting to get into. And that's why I'm looking forward to learning more, where I can learn more, and see how much we can actually discuss ourselves about the understanding of the types, perhaps even for now actually divorced from the methodology we're using to work out the types. I think once we've got an alignment on what types are and what types do, if we can do that, because I know you're more semantic in your approach, that can help build that alignment, which I think would be interesting.
Yes, I think it's yes. Remind, what is your version about Carl Jung? EIE? Is that correct?
IEI.
II.
I think I. Well, one thing I say when I was reading through, I didn't see very good, at least from what I think, a very clear logic. A lot of what he says is very vague, is pulling together different underlying trends, underlying archetypes and things which he feels are of importance and signal to humanity in general. But he didn't explain much of exactly how that seems to work, how that actually works, and making very clear distinctions. And I often find I'm going through, things just feel a bit fuzzy going through it. Maybe that's because if I'm an SLE, I would find that too fuzzy from what an ILE is saying. But I'm not seeing much of the extroverted logic in what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Do you know that his version was NT type, intuition and thinking and introverted? So what do you think?
Yes, I know he typed himself as the introverted thinking type. Now,
Yes.
what I would say, based on how he's described the introverted thinking type, someone who is very much approached to those resplendent ideas, as he says, rather than looking at how it's meant to work out in reality. And the focus on resplendent ideas about how it works out in reality, that conflict, that subjugation of extroverted logic for introverted logic. I think, yes, that could make sense for an introverted logic type, but it could also definitely make sense for an introverted logic mobilizing type, say an IEI or an SEI. I think in this case more IEI. And I'm seeing what I think to be a huge amount of introverted intuition in that. And he certainly doesn't have, in my opinion, the clarity that I find with LIIs and LSIs. It does still seem very fuzzy, very vague in exactly what he's trying to describe, talking about the introverted sensation type and trying to figure, okay, I've defined it as sensation, which is internal and subjective. What could that be like? And from his experience, he's saying someone who has an internalized sense of what reality is, which doesn't match up to the external reality. And it gets the impression of someone who sort of has like their own sense of how things are that isn't in accordance with reality. And it feels like some kind of mental illness, which also makes sense because he was looking at people who had mental illness. He was a psychiatrist. So that was his focus. It was very much clinical. So I mean, I'm looking at what Jung's saying. I'm looking at and the dichotomy he's making to split apart these different kinds of cognitive functions, and it still feels quite vaguely. It's a certain behavior which I can't see actually being sustainable in a person. Yet these are meant to describe clear types of people, whether unhealthy or healthy. And it's hard to see the health through the unhealth in these different descriptions. And there are those sorts of reasons why I think that he isn't a type of actually very strong logic, but someone who has really much pushed in the introverted logic without the extroverted logic. But always that's that introverted intuition. There seems to be very much that emphasis on going as deep as he can be into what the underlying motivations, the underlying forces, as it were, underlying humanity and its psyche. I think it's to call him a breadth type rather than a depth type, I think is where it gets difficult to see that match up with what's being said.
Do you find anything from beta in his activity?
I think so. I think in terms of this idea of this, talking about focusing on type, say the hero who goes out, who actually confronts chaos and brings things more towards order, I think has a certain beta quality to it. The romanticization of his archetypes and themes and aspirations which people look up to, I think is interesting. And also finding out about how he was in his life. He had a certain loyalty to Freud, for instance, but he also had dissension in that, and sort of he struggled with the idea of having a different viewpoint to Freud, but at the same time, no, Freud would not brook any difference of opinion towards him, and having that sort of confrontation. And then hearing about his relationship with Marie von Franz and the intensity of some of their relationships in their explorations, things get quite aggressive and very, very intense. And it didn't seem to be someone actually sought out environments of calm, environments of harmony with other people. Even though when you look at him, you talk to him, he comes across a very sort of calm, quite genial person. He's not radiating that forcefulness or intensity of extrovert sensation. Suggests extrovert sensation is quite weak, but actually quite valued. And so I'm still thinking beta, just not with a lot of extrovert sensation in other than maybe suggestive function.
Okay, that can sound reasonable. We believe that Carl Jung, E-I-L-E, but you are very. I agree that he has a very good introverted intuition. It's okay. But according to our method, there is no contradiction because any intuitive type can have both of them, and individually, it really can be that in activity or in his scientific works, he can manifest both extroverted intuition and introverted. The main thing that we decided that he's a logical type, that we found a great deal of black intuition and white logic in his views and in his activity. So something
one thing I would ask you, did you see more black intuition or black logic?
We studied his letters when we type some person from the past that is not present on YouTube. But by the way, there are some lectures of Carl Jung recorded on YouTube. But we really found black logic, white logic, and intuition among information aspects. He wrote many letters, and in that letters he manifested all that. And he also manifested weak ethics, which contradicts with the version of EIE. EIE should have a strong ethics, both black ethic and white.
Interesting. I think we would need to, because also one thing I did was I was talking about what I'm seeing rather than how I've assigned it to, say, white intuition, black intuition, etc. I think it might be good for us to have a chance to look at a celebrity or some sort of famous figure where we're talking about the observations we can see, and then from that seeing how we could assign it. I think that would be a very interesting discussion we could have. I think that's the ground.
We should decide what persons are we discussing, because it can be endless if we are passing from one person to another.
We need to have a limited number or short list of people just for the sake of having a video. It doesn't go everywhere, which could be fun, but I don't think it'll be useful to people. So yes, I think we should do that. I think it's put together a short list and do like a what type is video. I like what type is videos. Maybe I'd say 3 people would be more than enough between the 2 of us to look at.
For one conversation, I think yes.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that's good.
I think we made it. You typed me as in the same type that you expected, that you suggested before. So
yes.
The surprise didn't happen.
No, and to a degree that's also disappointing. I like surprises, but so when you get good heuristics, it happens. When you get good heuristics, you can see types before you do the interview and all the rest. But I wanted to challenge it. I did. But I'm glad as well that there is a coherence, at least between us, in terms of your typing, which I think is a good ground point as well to start from. I think because if I typed something completely different, I think, oh my goodness, what do we have in common? So, yeah.
Yes, I would like to thank you once more for this typing. It was really interesting, and I would like to thank to everyone who was watching us at this moment. I'm sorry that I didn't pay attention to the chat, but maybe I'm gonna answer some questions. I really have some of them from World Socionics Society. People come to my channel and ask some questions. So I'm going to make a series of videos in English just to give some more information about our method. And I think your typing will always help in understanding and in making some bridges between various methodologies. So thank you very much, Jack.
I think in which case, thank you everyone for watching. And if you do have any sort of questions for Timur, is there an email which they can send to you, Timur? Is there an email address they can contact you?
Of course, there is an email. I'm gonna put it right now on the chat.
Yes.
So
we'll put that under the video as well for people, and also link to your channel so you can see that. I've got to get going as well because I've got got a premium interview with a fella in a bit, so I got to go to that. But thank you very much, and hope you have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and take care. I think Tim's just putting up the link now, just in the comments. Or did you do it
to the channel?
Oh, actually no. If you send it to me via Facebook, I'll then put it under the video. I think that'll work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.